For today's video, we are back on the Jetson Orin Nano, and we are going to be doing a simple RAG tutorial. Now, you may have heard the term RAG thrown around, but if you are perhaps still a little confused on what it actually means, for the purpose of this video, we can just think of it as a way to have an LLM actually be able to work with some of your own proprietary data. So, as we will see in the video, this essentially will allow us to have an LLM look at a PDF of proprietary data that it otherwise would not have been aware of because it wouldn't have been trained on such data. And in doing that, it actually allows it to be able to answer questions about it and kind of talk to you as if it was trained on that data set. Now, before we go further, I do want to kind of give a small disclaimer here in that I do hope this tutorial quickly becomes obsolete because, as we will see, there are kind of a few frustrating issues that kind of need to be contended with to actually get this set up and working. Some of them are perhaps due to unfortunate timing in that it does seem Ollama is actually broken on the Jetson container side of things and perhaps in some other use cases as well. Another one is just a configuration sort of oversight, I suppose you could say. With those kind of disclaimers out of the way, right before we jump into it, I do want to say that if this is the first time you are actually seeing my Jetson content, I did go ahead and make a full hour-long or so setup tutorial video for this device. And while it is not a strict prerequisite to have seen that to actually follow along with what we're doing today, it definitely may help in just making you a little more comfortable, perhaps with some of the terminology and things we do. With that out of the way, we are basically going to begin by going to the Jetson Containers GitHub repository, and I am actually going to, in the pinned comment, just post a link to the full tutorial. So if any of this does seem somewhat confusing, you can probably just hop into that and it will make a lot more sense. But once we have searched Jetson Containers on Google, we are met with the Jetson Containers GitHub repository. And we can essentially just think of this as a bunch of almost Docker containers that allow us to run specifically tailored machine learning or AI applications for the Jetson. So this is maintained by Dusty-NV, who is an NVIDIA Jetson developer. So for kind of our purposes, we can think of this as an NVIDIA source almost for examples and tutorials of things that we can do with our Jetson. Now, in order to actually go ahead and get started with the RAG workflow that we are going to be using today, we actually do need to set the Jetson containers up so that we can run them on our device. Now, before we do that, I am just going to zoom into the browser real quick so it is a little easier to see. But because this is a fresh install of Jetpack 6.1, which is the operating system that runs on the Jetson, we are actually going to just kind of follow the getting started piece here. I did show this in the tutorial video, but since I need to do it anyway, as this is a fresh install, I figure we can have it as a refresher, if nothing more. So from the Jetson Containers repository, we basically scroll down till we see getting started, and we basically just copy and paste this command into a terminal window for the Jetson containers to be cloned onto our system and set up. And as we do this, we will likely be prompted to enter our user password. And we can see we have been prompted for our password, which we will just enter. And then it may also ask us if we want to download some additional things. And we just type Y and press enter, and it will kind of continue going. Once that has concluded, that basically kind of finishes the actual Jetson container setup that we need to do in order to actually start playing with the RAG pipeline, or I should say leading us into being able to. If we scroll up here, we will kind of see a table of different options, and these are basically some of the examples for kind of Jetson containers or different things to be run on the Jetson, organized by what they actually are. So we have an LLM, a vision language model, RAG, which is what we're going to be doing, robotics, and etc. Since we are focused on RAG for this video, we are going to just look in this cell right here in the table, and we are going to click on the one that says Jetson-Copilot. Now, I do believe Microsoft had come out with something called Copilot, so don't get the two confused. And as we can see right here, this is just a temporary name for an Ollama LlamaIndex based Streamlit enabled container which, to put it simply, is just an online kind of web app that runs locally that will allow us to perform some RAG on some of our documents and with an LLM. Now, in order to actually get this set up on our machine, we are basically going to scroll down until we see the section here for running the container. As we are going to see, there are a few different ways to actually run a container. One of those is to just use the auto tag feature, which in theory would basically select a compatible container image for your specific device and then download it. However, I have found that sometimes with a newer install of Jetpack 6.1 or a newer Jetson device, it may be a bit easier to just kind of try the newest one first, which is what we are going to do here. So to do this, we are basically just going to copy this command right here, which will go ahead and actually run the Jetson Copilot container version 36.3.0. And we will paste this into our terminal right here. And as we see, it will say, okay, I have not found it locally, meaning that it is not on your local machine, and therefore it will go ahead and actually download this from like the internet, or basically like from right here. Ignore that. It will download this. And we can see it will take a little bit of time. It is about a 6.5 gigabyte download. And once that's done, depending on network speed, however long it takes, we will then move into the next step, which is unfortunately going to be a little bit more involved. So the container has finished being pulled or downloaded, and it is actually now running on our machine. We are actually in the container here. As you can see, the actual kind of shell prompt has changed from what we saw previously. So this is obviously what we saw previously when we actually ran the container, but now that it's running, we are actually inside the container, and therefore we see this. In a perfect world, we would basically just be able to now go ahead and start the kind of RAG pipeline and be able to play with that. Unfortunately, this is where things become perhaps a bit more involved and potentially frustrating. So we are going to work through them together and kind of band-aid fix a way around it. On the GitHub repository here, we can see that there is an Issues tab. Now, if we click on this, we will see that this is essentially for folks who are having issues with any one of these Jetson containers related pieces of software to be able to ask about the questions, do bug reports, or something of that sort. We can see that 3 days ago, an individual had mentioned a problem with running the Ollama Jetson container, and this was actually reported as recently as a few hours ago by other individuals and also on this specific device, the Orin Nano Super. And an individual who I do believe is actually like a collaborator on this repository has specified that this is a problem with Ollama. Apparently it is broken and a new release needs to be put out for this to be fixed. As an impatient person, I did a little digging and I do believe I found a kind of band-aid fix around this. The big issue with that is I tried a few different things and I don't necessarily remember the one thing that actually fixed it. So we are essentially going to together retrace those steps and basically try to see what ends up fixing this for us. So we do see the error is basically here, and I think what it boils down to is that Ollama is a bit confused as to where some of its directories are located, or the logic is not quite working. So if I were to type Ollama list, normally it would just kind of show the downloaded models I had. Even if I didn't have any, it would actually just show like what would be there if there were any models downloaded. However, we get this error where basically could not connect to an Ollama app. Is it running? And in a perfect world, it would have been running here, so we wouldn't have gotten any of these errors or anything like that. The first thing I do believe that I tried was actually to go to the jetson-ailab.com, which is kind of a tutorial hub for the Jetson, not dissimilar to the Jetson Containers GitHub repository. From here, I actually went ahead and just clicked on the text generation tutorial example. And when you do that, you can see a side panel here with a bunch of different examples and kind of just a different, perhaps more aesthetically pleasing way of instructing you on running them. Now, the first thing I believe I checked is to actually click on Ollama here and perform a native install. And to put it simply, that basically means that we will be installing Ollama onto this Jetson kind of on the just Jetpack 6.1 operating system, not installing it within a Jetson container or anything like that. So that is kind of what a native install means in this scope. In order to basically begin this, I am actually just going to close this terminal, which has the Jetson container for the Copilot running, as we won't need this right this second. And once we've done that, I am going to open a new terminal window and essentially just follow the steps to actually perform a native install for Ollama. Now, I do believe that when this happens, and again, I don't actually know that this is the one thing that actually got this working for me, but I think I have like a 68% sure guess that this is what fixed it. So once the installer completes for the native Ollama installation, it does say, okay, it is ready, run Ollama from the command line. So right now I'm just going to try that same Ollama list that we tried from within the downloaded container. And if it works here, we are hopefully in good shape to actually have like soon resolved this kind of obscure issue. And we can see that this is ideally what we would have wanted to see when we had run this in the container, where basically it would just give us the name of the model we have, the size, etc. Now, we don't actually have any downloaded models on this device right now, so it is completely normal for this to just kind of be an empty list like this. Now, I do believe that, you know what, I'm not going to try to make any guesses as to why that happened yet. I am going to basically run the container again and see if Ollama has kind of fixed itself yet. And if it has not, then we will perhaps try a different potential fix for this. Now, you will see here there are like a bunch of different commands listed for actually running this container, which can perhaps be somewhat confusing, but for testing purposes here, we are just going to run this now with the auto tag, as we already have it downloaded on our system, so we don't have to worry about it pulling an incompatible one because it will just run the one we had downloaded earlier. And interesting, we can see that it is still actually giving the issue, which is quite interesting because I was pretty, it seems like we may have fixed this, but we may not have. So we are actually going to now go ahead and try running the container with the additional arguments which pertain to 1, Ollama being started, and 2, the actual web app that will allow us to kind of chat with the LLM with the RAG implementation as well. So I will just kind of close the terminal here, and we will once again run the command to start this container, but with those flags appended, which will then go ahead and start it in a way that will allow us to see if this will actually work. And it is going to ask, oh, hey, email for Streamlit. Just press enter to bypass that. You don't have to enter your email. And once we do this, we are going to click on the local URL that has been generated here, and that will bring us to this application on our browser. Now, once we have opened this page, we are brought to this Jetson Copilot kind of web app, and really something that quite frustrates me about this is that this automatically starts to download a Llama 3 model. Now, this is likely downloading Llama 3 8B, a 4-bit quant. However, for wanting to run this on the Orin Nano Super, if you're trying to run Llama 3 8B with the overhead of the web browser being open, the actual desktop GUI being open, a RAG thing like functioning on top of it, it's just not going to work for this device. So it is quite frustrating that basically as soon as this runs, you're forced to download this model that is going to be too performance intensive to reasonably use in this use case, and you have no choice to opt out of it. So this is kind of frustrating to me, and it kind of leads us into the next thing we need to do to actually get this running properly on the Orin Nano Super. So I am going to just go ahead and close out of this terminal here. And you can see that it's not responding very quickly right now. So that is just quite frustrating. If we go back to the Jetson Containers GitHub repository page here for the Jetson Copilot, we are going to see some of the associated files with this container. One of those being app.py, which is essentially responsible for that Streamlit web application and some other backend logic. If we click on this, we are going to see that, it's still okay. If we click on that file, we are going to see that basically once it starts, it runs a pull models function where basically if Llama 3 latest is not in models, it just automatically starts to download it without asking you or kind of thinking, oh, maybe the user has a different model they want to use because their device cannot run this with... I'm getting a little frustrated, I'm sorry, because this kind of was a long day of troubleshooting and tinkering with this. Essentially, the way around this is to actually modify that file. But if we just modify this file from within the Docker container and then close it and restart it, those changes will not persist. So the way we actually need to do this is kind of following the section down here where it talks about mounting our own directories into the container. So we are essentially going to duplicate this file, this static folder, and this Streamlit folder, and then make the changes to not auto-download the model, and then mount that directory into the container when we start to run it, which will then open it up and run it without auto-downloading a model that is not very compatible with our use case. So we are now going to go ahead and do that. I do have a little text file here just with some of these commands that will allow us to make a directory with a modified app.py file for us to kind of run the directory or with the container with. So the first thing we're going to do is just run this first one, which is essentially making a new directory on our system called Jetson-Copilot. And once we have done that, we can type ls here to list the current files, and we will see that we now have a Jetson-Copilot directory. So we are going to change our current working directory into that by typing cd and then Jetson-Copilot. And once we are in there, really, I suppose there's nothing to do through the terminal here because the rest of the things we need to do actually just kind of involve downloading these files manually and then placing them in that directory, which is a better use of the actual like graphical file browser, I suppose you could say. So we are going to navigate into the Jetson Copilot folder here. And then the first thing we're going to do is from the GitHub repository for the Jetson Copilot container, we are going to click on app.py and we are simply going to download this raw file. Following that, we are going to go back and we are going to click on the static folder here. And we see two kind of image files here. These are essentially just for the actual chat web app. They are essentially icons, one for the user and one for the AI. Following that, we are going to open this Streamlit folder here, and we can see that there is a little config file here, and we are also going to go ahead and just download this. Now, we are essentially just going to rebuild this file structure in the directory that we had made here, which was the Jetson-Copilot directory. So we will make a new file browser window by typing Control-N, and under our downloads, we will see that we now have all of these things. However, the only one we want to drag directly in here is app.py because the rest of these are supposed to be within these folders. So we actually do need to recreate these folders as well. First, we will create the static folder. And were these the pictures? Okay, yeah, they were. All right, so I did just want to make sure that the pictures were what went in the static folder. So we will drag these and place them into the static folder. And the next thing we're going to do is recreate the .streamlit folder. Now, keep in mind, if you append a dot to a file, as we can see here, that will make it a hidden file. So if I click create, it doesn't actually show up here. On Ubuntu, just to quickly show hidden files from within the actual file explorer, you can click on the kind of three dashes here and click show hidden files, and then the folder will appear. So we can then drag this into the Streamlit folder, and we are almost ready to now have our custom mounted directory that we can then launch our container with. The next thing we're going to do is just quickly modify this app.py file to actually just remove the logic that auto downloads the Llama 3 model. So that logic is fortunately pretty early in the script, and it is under the pull models function. So essentially from this if statement right here, so if Llama 3 latest is not in models, then download the model, and download the model. That's what that line, we don't need to worry about what these do. But basically, we are going to delete these 3 lines, and then we are going to save it. And that is essentially all we really needed to do to actually not have this auto download that Llama 3 8B model. So we are almost ready to actually go ahead and kind of do what probably should have been a quicker tutorial, but I suppose it is a fantastic learning experience to have to go and do some of these things. So I am going to clear my terminal here, and there is actually 1 or 2 steps that I have actually neglected to do. So we do also actually need a local directory on this machine to put the documents that we would like to use for this RAG pipeline. What I mean by that, to put it simply, is if we run this command right here, it is going to make a directory in the data documents Jetson. It will make that directory within the Jetson containers folder, and inside that directory we can actually place a PDF that we download that we will then be able to use for some RAG use cases with a Ollama LLM that we are going to download as well. So we will just kind of place a PDF in there. We go to Jetson containers, we go to data, then we have documents and Jetson. So this is the directory that we just created, and I will just go find kind of a short PDF to download and place in there just for demonstration purposes. All right, so I found a random PDF right here. It's on 3D printed acoustic metamaterials. Very interesting. I know that sounds sarcastic. It wasn't. But basically, now what I'm going to do is just place that within this new directory that we had created to be able to store our documents for the RAG usage. And once I drag that in there, we are almost ready to go ahead and start our Copilot container and actually be able to see RAG in action. The only other thing that we need to do, because of some of the slight modifications we had to make just because of the Ollama incompatibility and some other stuff, I am going to just manually pull a very small Ollama model. So if you have not actually used Ollama before or are not familiar with actually going ahead and finding models, it is quite simple. We can just go to ollama.com. And once we're there, if you click on the search bar, it will likely show you the most recent / most popular current models. And fortunately for us, the one we want is right here at Llama 3.2, 1B, or 3B. If I was to just type this into the terminal right now and run it, it would pull the 3 billion parameter model. Because this is more of just like an educational video and I want things to go a bit quicker, I am going to elect to actually pull the 1 billion parameter model, which if you see, we can, like if you click a different one, it changes the specific run command here to point to the specific model you have chosen. So we will paste this into our terminal. And because we did do the native install of Ollama as well to kind of try to band-aid fix that Ollama issue, we can get away with actually doing this here. And when we type that, it will go ahead and download the model onto our system. And once it's done, we will be able to move forward. And once the model is downloaded, we will kind of see something like this where we can actually then go ahead and send it a message. However, I do not wish to communicate with it through this medium, so I'm just going to type /by, which will just exit that session, I suppose you could say. The next thing to do is basically go back to the containers instruction here, and we can see that we can go ahead and run this with the additional arguments to 1, start Ollama, and 2, start the web app. However, if you recall, we had to actually make some changes to that app.py so it wouldn't go ahead and try to download a model that is not very compatible with it. So we actually need to utilize the mounting our own directories function here using the -v flag. Fortunately, I kind of already have that command written here because I otherwise probably would have not been able to write it from memory. So we are basically going to be running the same command that we see right up here with the additional arguments to start Ollama and the Streamlit web app, but we are running that in combination with the flag to mount our own directory. And hopefully, fingers crossed, if we type this in and press enter, it should then go ahead and provide us with a web URL where we can go to. So again, we can just type enter here to bypass having to put in our email or anything like that. Also, just to quickly note, they do take some usage statistics and things like that. So if you would like to opt out, they do have instructions right here. Just something I like to bring up for the security-minded folks among us. So I'm going to go ahead and open this. Good. And then we will see now that we did not strip out the code to automatically begin to download the model that will actually kind of handle the RAG stuff. And we didn't want to do that because we need that. So we can see here downloading the MX by embed large model. And we are basically just going to allow that to conclude because we actually do need that for the RAG functionality, if you will. So we can see that the download for that has gone away, which we would think means it has concluded. However, we are just getting an error that it is not in our list here. However, it is also defaulting to choose Llama 3 latest. So what we're going to do right now is click this drop down and specify the model that we actually did download, which was the 1 billion parameter Llama 3.2. And then the MX by embed large latest is there as well. And fortunately, our error message has changed now, which is a good thing, to the directory data/documents/Jetson does not exist. Now, it is possible that I may have become confused or incorrectly followed these instructions because when we went ahead and actually did this, it just... So here's what we need to do. We're going to go ahead and just kind of close out of this. And we are also actually going to exit out of this terminal session. And we are going to open the file browser here. We are going to click home, which will just open our home folder. And I do believe that the way to actually get this working, or at least what had worked for me, is essentially putting the document or the PDF that we want to actually use in this example into this data folder under Documents and Jetson, which we may have to actually make those directories. However, we can see here that there is a lock on this folder, so we cannot actually paste anything in here, and the option to go in here and make a new folder is grayed out. Fortunately, we are on Ubuntu and we can easily bypass this. So we are going to type Control-Alt-T to open a new terminal window. And from here, let's just type ls to see. Okay, so the data directory is the one that we have in question. So it's chmod is to kind of change the accessibility of the file depending on the user group. So like if you typed ls-la, see how it gives these kind of like weird little like drwxr. So that's like read, write, I think some other stuff. I don't remember my Linux classes that well from college, but I do recall that is kind of the way to go. So we are going to type chmod-r777, which is just kind of going to set the permissions to fully open. You wouldn't want to do this on a production machine, but for a local kind of exploratory thing like this, it's totally acceptable to do. And then I think we just type data. Oh, and I forgot to run that as root. So we are going to type sudo before we do that, enter our password, and assuming I did not mess something up, if we go back into the file browser here and click home, we will see that the orange lock is no longer on the data folder. So now we will click into the data folder here, and I'm going to create a new folder called Documents. And then from within that Documents folder, I'm going to create a new folder called Jetson. It is also possible to do this all through the command line instead of having to right click and click new folder. Since we're in here, I'm just electing to do it this way. And now, finally, we are going to want to drag our PDF into this directory now. So from the seemingly incorrect place that I had placed it earlier, we are going to go and find it and then place it in here. And again, this may be kind of like the incorrect way to go about doing this, but truthfully, due to kind of the amount of weird stuff you have to set up to get this working on this device, at this point, it's like if it works, I'm happy, regardless of what led up to it working. So we have now theoretically place that in the correct location that our container is asking for. So all we can do now is basically go back into this text editor where we had the special command to start the container with all of the special options, and press paste. And then we will say no to that, and we will go ahead and open this once more, and fingers crossed that we do not get any red error messages in there. I may have also not clicked it properly. All right. Okay, so good sign. It is loading and indexing the Jetson docs. Hang tight. This should take 1 to 2 minutes. And okay, system throttle due to overcurrent. Unfortunately, the cool metamaterial PDF that I had tried using this with just did not seem like it was going to play nice with it. It did get to the point where the device was actually just physically shutting down and rebooting. So I had ChatGPT make up a really short and fictitious PDF about a fake device. So basically we can actually just use this to test and see how RAG actually works. So this device is called the Chronosynaptic Quantum Differentiator, which obviously is made up and something the LLM will actually likely have no knowledge of unless it tries to hallucinate the answer, but it shouldn't. So we are now going to basically go ahead and run the container again, just keeping in mind that we are using the flags to both start the web application and Ollama, and also kind of mount our custom modified directory with the app.py that won't auto-download a model. I do see here that it seems like we're getting some Ollama issues again, but I still think this is going to work. And again, hopefully that is something that gets quickly resolved on Ollama's end, or whoever's fault it really is. That way, kind of that whole troubleshooting step of this tutorial can be ignored. So we can see that when we have opened this URL, it just shows loading and indexing the Jetson docs. Hang tight, this should take 1 to 2 minutes. All right. And once that is concluded, we are just going to make sure that we are actually selecting the LLM we have on our machine, which is Llama 3.21b. And now all I'm going to do is ask it, what is the, and then I will paste the name of our fictitious device. And hopefully, no matter potentially how long this may take to actually give us a response, we will see it having specifically referenced our PDF document. And really, this will allow us to kind of see RAG in action and understand what it is. We can see that although it is a bit slow, it has begun to hopefully reference our document. So we can see that according to the document, the chronosynaptic quantum, cool. And it is actually referencing it in the kind of parentheses abbreviation of just the 3 letters, which we did not actually feed this in the prompt. So that does actually show that it is pulling that from the actual PDF document. And this is the whole point of RAG, and it is really kind of cool and exciting, at least to someone like me who's interested in this stuff. But it is just really kind of cool. I am going to let this finish its response here, and obviously I will speed that up a bit so we don't have to wait very long. And then what I'm going to do is actually close this and just run this model through Ollama through the command line, and I will ask it the same exact question that I asked it here, and we will see how the response differs. Because in the beginning of this video, I think, I don't know, it was like 7-8 hours ago at this point that I filmed the introduction, but I do believe I said it's kind of easier just to see RAG and understand what it is than trying to really explain it. So that is kind of my hope here, is once this is done, we will ask the command line model without the RAG workflow implemented in it the same question, and we will see the difference of answer. So this is still going, but I am perhaps thinking I may actually stop it soon, because as we will see in a second, this has pretty much entirely regurgitated the actual definition of this from our document, which is exactly what we wanted, because it shows that this is actually working. Well, basically, it says here, according to the document, the CQD is a hypothetical device that represents a breakthrough in the field of temporal energy manipulation. And we can see that that is literally the exact word-for-word thing that is said in this PDF. So in the absence of this PDF and this kind of RAG pipeline workflow in general, it would not have actually been able to do this because it would have had no idea about our kind of specific proprietary knowledge, which really is one of the big draws of RAG and things like that. I do find sometimes after force quitting, if it was working really hard, the system is still just very slow. I did just want to show one other thing. Okay, so we're not going to be able to do that, but there were two other options down there on the sidebar of that web app, and they were something to do with the actual like kind of RAG backend and functionality, if you will. It splits this data into something referred to as chunks, and basically the two options that were contained there in that actual web app are to adjust the amount of like text that makes up one specific chunk, and then the one below it was basically how much like each chunk will overlap with a different chunk. So basically, let's say that like this was split in half, like this was one chunk and then this one right here was a different chunk. You kind of perhaps sometimes want some of these to actually overlap like this so that it actually knows to associate different parts of something together to give more context. There's probably much more thorough explanations for that online, but I did kind of just want to bring that up because I think it was something perhaps important just to know about, that that option is also available there to adjust in that web app. Really, the final thing we are going to do is run the exact same prompt through the command line Ollama. So just as we did before, I am going to ask it what is the, I don't know if that's specifically what I asked it, but for the purpose of this, it's okay. What is the chronosynaptic quantum differentiator? And we can see, you might be like, hey, wait a second, it's actually doing this. So what this is doing now, this is called hallucination. When a model basically doesn't know the answer, and instead of just being like, I have no idea what you're talking about, you just make something up. But we can see that this differs very much from the actual thing that we saw with the RAG thing. It may at first glance look kind of similar, but essentially it all falls apart starting here where the actual abbreviation of the name of this device changes because it adds a S, and then a theoretical model proposed dynamic of neural activity in the brain, which obviously is not true because recent theoretical advances, which is obviously common knowledge. So, all right, now I'm done. I'm very tired. So this really is just kind of a long-winded tutorial that has to deal with a few speed bumps in actually getting this running on the Jetson Orin Nano Super, but I did want to continue doing things with this device, and I will continue to do so. Unfortunately, it just seems like kind of bad luck with the kind of Ollama speed bump that has to be dealt with. Fortunately, the Band-Aid fix did seem to work, at least for kind of academic educational purposes and playing with this stuff. Aside from that, this is definitely replicatable for those of us who have this device at home. Just keep in mind that if you have a bigger PDF or something like that, or just a large file you want to share with it, this device may not be the best thing to actually test that with. So looking at this as more of a kind of getting our feet wet with RAG and learning experience is likely the best way to actually handle playing with this and testing RAG. Jetson containers are cool, and it is really cool to be able to go on and see that web app and actually kind of just do it that way. It's very neat, and I hope that this was somewhat useful, even though I do hope that in a couple weeks this tutorial is kind of obsolete because hopefully some of these issues will have been resolved, therefore leading this to be a really simple, like kind of 5-minute process to get this working. Well, that is going to conclude this for today. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer.